Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and our guest this week is Morgan Ingram, the host of SDR Chronicles on YouTube. Mike Simmons, tell us how you're connected with Morgan.
Thanks, Jody. And Morgan, it's great to have you on the podcast this week. I was introduced to Morgan through Patrick Robinson, a guy that I work with, one of our clients, and then started watching some of the SDR Chronicles, saw some of the interviews, and heard him on the Why and the Buy podcast, and reached out and asked him if he'd be interested in joining us.
Well, Morgan, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and drop some knowledge for sure.
Well, the first bit of knowledge I want dropped is I don't know what SDR means.
That's a great question. I get that a lot. So what SDR means is a sales development representative, basically a rep that's reaching out to net new accounts, generating awareness and interest, and handing off to account executive, or also called AE, that will close the deal for the business and generate revenue.
Awesome. And so that brings up a question on so Jody, did that hit the mark for you now that you're introduced to the SDR role?
Yeah, I'm a pro now.
You are a pro. Well, you get to participate in all these podcasts and you hear new acronyms. You are slowly but surely becoming a pro. In fact, I bet you could teach some sales training at some point in time if you want to change your career up.
Yeah, I think we're getting there with all these episodes of this show.
So, Morgan, you talk about SDR, you talk about AE. One of the things that's kind of interesting in the field is how specialized all these roles are getting. As we start to get access to more data, more information, understanding of how customers buy, specialization helps organizations scale. Can you talk to me about how the SDR AE transition works inside? And I know you're with Terminus. How the SDR AE transition works, or that handoff works inside the organization you're a part of?
Yeah, for sure. And you're talking about transitioning within just like they're getting the opportunity to have an AE, or just like if you actually want to get promoted and get into that role?
Yeah, great question. Let's do both of those, but let's start with that whole, I'm an SDR. I've made contact with someone at an account. I've had enough conversations with them that it makes sense for me to move them over to an AE based on our process. What is that?
Okay. Cool. So I've seen two models, and this is basically the two models that most companies run on. So the first model is basically just like it's greenfield. Go out there, hunt, do what you need to do. And that's really like you have your uncapped, unlimited amount of accounts. You can go after whatever you want. And basically what the messages that you have segmented for your own self, reaching out to those accounts to actually generate that interest. And basically what happens there is at our company, we have a round robin. Some people do it by territories. Some people do one-to-one basis, like SDR to AE, or some companies have one SDR to two AEs. Depends on your structure of your organization. But we just have completely greenfield. There is no territories. And so basically we would reach out to these accounts. If there's interest, we would hand it off to the account executive. And basically there are certain questions and certain things that we need to make sure that we have before we hand that over. For us, was different technologies, such as a CRM, customer relationship management platform, just like a Salesforce, or marketing automation, which is like Marketo, Pardot. And so by having those type of tools, as we hand it off to the account executive, they become more equipped for the call. And the more equipped that account executive is, the shorter the sales cycle is. So that's kind of how that transition works from, hey, like the SDR goes and finds that account, hunts it, farms it essentially, and then basically that account executive is nurturing it to get to that close one.
And is that a phone call or a video conversation that you have with the AE? Is it an in-person thing? Is it just documented and then passed over? All the above? Like how does it work too?
Yeah, so it's been working just by so we send out a calendar invite, and basically in that calendar invite's the details, and basically it'd be something like this, like a Zoom, or it would be kind of like a join me, whatever that AE has. I think we've actually switched over to Zoom now. So basically with that, they log into the information, they have the call. Most of the conversations with an account executive, if you get like a good account or there's something that you have to talk to them about, it's face to face, because our organization is not as big as like maybe like a Dell or like Adobe or something of that nature, where it's like maybe you have somebody like in 3 different states or 3 different countries. So it's normally face to face. But most companies that I've talked to that are bigger and their sales development teams, they have like Zoom calls, and they'll have like phone calls of like, hey, like this is what this account is, kind of prepping that account executive. But we're super fortunate that everyone's kind of face to face.
Awesome. And where does it fail? Like when it's not working well, what usually happens?
Yeah, the transition fails well, there's a lot of things that can happen. So I think the number one thing for sure is when the SDR themselves are not doing proper qualification. They're just trying to send something over, just say quota, like numbers, they're not really focused. And so what happens there is like it gets sent over, and the account executive gets it. And if it's not the best of calls and they keep getting stuff that's not as qualified or actually going to get closed at the end of the day, your brand's going to dilute within the organization. So that's something that can go wrong. Something else that can go wrong is I had to figure this out really quick, is time zones. So you think that someone's like, especially mountain time. It's like I didn't realize mountain time was even like a thing, like when I was sitting on calendar beds. So it was like Salt Lake City. And I was like, oh yeah, like that's West Coast, right? And then it's like ends up being like mountain time. So it's 2 hours, not 3 hours. And then it's like you mess up the schedule. Like I've done that before. So like you don't want to be me. When I first started, I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. So make sure that you're not doing that. That's a big mistake that people do. I think looking at time zones. And then I think another thing is not making sure that you have the right criteria with each account executive. There is a baseline guideline that, each handoff is going to have within your organization, but there also is specialities within each account executive, what they want, what they like, what type of job titles that they prefer. So, you want to make sure that you're giving them the best bat and like what they're really looking for.
Yeah. So speaking on the time zone piece, I live in Arizona and we don't change our clocks. Yeah. And you think that would make it a lot easier for us. It actually is, it's crazy when you see calendar invites for the first couple of weeks after time change, where we're showing up to meetings late or showing up to meetings early. It just is a giant cluster. As you were talking through that, you started to talk about the different types of sales rep mentalities that you have out there, account executive mentalities.
Of course.
And think about this as what learning to dance with each other. How do you learn to dance with a new AE? Let's say a new AE comes into the organization. You've been doing the SDR thing for a while. You lead a team of SDRs. Do you want to help with the onboarding process of this new AE? How does that look? Or what does that look like from an SDR perspective?
Yeah, from an SDR perspective or just from being a leader?
SDR perspective, being a leader, take it however you want.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that there's two different viewpoints on that. I think for being an SDR, I think when someone always started and I had to hand them off an account, I would just always ask them, what are you looking for in each account? Do you want to know how close they are to buying? Do you want to know what technology they're using? Do you want to know if they even know about, account-based marketing here? Or do you want to know how long they've been a MarTech? What are things that you want to see in your notes? I would always ask that to every single person, at least when they started. So I at least had a frame of reference to make sure that my notes were tailored towards them. And it wasn't something that I was just randomly sending over. Try to make it at least tailored as much as I could as possible to that person. I think as a leader, I kind of encourage people to do the same thing. So it's kind of the same thing, but I also try to talk to that person just from a basis of high level, what are you looking for from each rep? So then at least I can tell the reps if they're not proactive and asking. But I think to make sure that those handoffs are good, to make sure that if a new person's coming in, you just got to figure out what are they looking for, what their personality is like, and how detailed do they want their notes, and how well do they want that handoff to be.
And the thing that resonates for me there is communication. You're talking about communication and setting expectations. It's this communication style from the perspective of the person that you're communicating with, and setting expectations based on your understanding of what's important to them. And it applies whether you're talking about working with an internal team or an external team. So whether you're selling outside of the organization or you're generating internal buy-in, these concepts apply. If you start from the perspective of the person you're working with, things tend to work a lot better.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about that transition from SDR to AE. If someone wanted to go on that career path, what's that look like?
Yeah, I do get. I guess I ask this question a lot because I think it's. I think people sometimes have a conception of that, you're going to become a manager and you're going to just prop your feet up and then things are just going to happen for you. That's literally not what happens at all. So don't get it twisted. I think the thing that happens, at least for me, so it's different for each person, but I was, of course, an SDR before I got promoted. So I actually had a lot of friends on that team that obviously developed relationships with, and so now probably over half the team. The people that I manage, I'm friends with them. Even some people that I manage, we're actually best friends. So it's just kind of it's kind of weird at first because it's hey, look, I'm your friend, but at the same time, if you're not doing the right things, I got to be real with you. I think that's difficult for some people because it's you were really buddy with people, but in some cases you can't be the shoulder to cry on the person that you can complain with because your responsibilities are now different. So what I really see is you just have to be a person that is willing to work for others and realize that people aren't working for you. And I feel once you understand that concept and a leadership standard, then you're going to be more successful because you're going to be willing to be more proactive and really put your heart and soul into it because that's really what it takes, because you're going to get thrown things at you differently every single day that you're just well, okay, what is this? And if you're able to kind of take a deep dive into like what those people's strengths are and like what their problems are, then like you're going to really be successful.
Yeah. If you're moving into a leadership role because you want to stroke your own ego, you're moving into the wrong role. That is not what leadership is.
You're not
servant based, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about, let's say I want to move into that AE role. Like I'm an SDR. Let's say you've got a member of your team, SDR on your team says, I'd like to be an account executive. What's that conversation look like with a member of your team or with someone who's been in an SDR role for a number of years?
Yeah. So if they've been I mean, so we even start this process around, I think 6-7 months. So we actually just crafted up this program. So SDR to AE mentorship program. So once the SDR hits 6 months, they partner up with an account executive who's been over in the role for 6 months. And that AE is a mentor to that SDR. So they can kind of see the ins and outs of like an account executive's like work balance, and also see like their life balance. Like, because they're doing this much work, like what's their life actually look like? Like, what are the stresses? Like, what are things that are keeping them up at night? So like, you can really see like, do you actually want to be an account executive, or is it just some hype that you're saying in your head? Right. So we do that program. And so people see the ins and outs of it. I also encourage people to, listen to the calls that they set up from first demo completed all the way to close one. So you can kind of see like what it really is. Like, it's not just like you have one call and everything closes or dies. Like, that's not how sales works. So like, you just kind of have to understand like, what's the sales cycle and like, what's that actual procedure? So then you can put yourself in the right positions overall, like where you're going in general. So I felt like that's actually will build business acumen. And then also like biggest thing is like reading materials about your industry and being very familiar. So you're speaking the same language as your prospects and you're not talking foreign to them. You're actually like correlating with them at the end of the day. So those are like 3 things that you need to be doing if you're considering being an account executive. But I think it also ultimately leads into like reaching out to other account executives, being proactive and like really seeing what their lifestyle's like. Cause like if you don't correlate with like kind of what they're saying or what they're doing, then like you're just not going to be successful overall.
Yeah. Well, so you were talking about kind of the ebbs and flows. And one of the things that you've put out there, one of the messages you put out there is consistency breeds results. Can you talk to that a bit? Like, what do you mean when you say consistency breeds results? What do you mean?
Yeah, it's like, if you don't, like, I always say this, like, if you don't show up, you can't show out, right? So it literally is just like, if you don't show up, it literally doesn't matter as much as you want it to happen. It's just not going to happen. So easiest example is like the gym. Like, if you're not consistent with the gym, like the results just won't be there. You're not going to be as, toned as you want to be. You're not going to have enough strength that you thought that you're going to have. Like, if you're not consistent, it's just not going to work. So it's the same thing with in this role. Like, if you don't have consistent, like schedule consistent actions, like your results won't be consistent. I think it's across the board with whatever you really want to do. If you're just not being consistent in certain things, like they're just going to fall off and it's not going to be as good as it could be. So when you actually are consistent in things that you do, you have a schedule and you do it every single day, that consistency snowballs into results. But you can't get that snowball if you're only showing up one day out of every single year.
Yeah. And when you show up, it means going to work too. Like showing up into the gym and having a drink at the water cooler and shooting the crap with everybody does not get you.
Yeah, no, you can't do that.
You have got to do the work.
Yeah. You can't just be chilling at the water fountain. Like, you got to be proactive in when you actually do show up.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about process. Like, what is your process? How does that work? How do you know whether or not you're actually delivering on the things that you expect to do? And this is all kind of one question or multiple questions kind of moved into a group of them. But can you talk a little bit about process, execution, measurables that you kind of look at to make sure that you're on target? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So from SDR perspective, I think for me, it was how there's a lot of things that go into it. I think I did it by quarter basis. I think by monthly basis, it's going to be kind of skewed because obviously what you do in December is going to be different than what you do in like May. Like, those are 2 different months, like in sales wise. Like, December is just never really that good of a month for SDRs per se, because everyone's out of town. So it's just kind of think about that. I do things by quarters. So I evaluated myself by how well I did each quarter. And based on, the opportunities that I was sending over, how many were actually closing, how many were actually going to interest, how many were actually, going to evaluation, things of that nature, like what was actually going on. So I found out that, if I was able to trend higher and like these deals were moving faster and that my techniques were doing better, that was good. I also did it based on, I just posted the video on like how fast I could hit quota before the month ended. So I would try to hit quota in the first 2 weeks every single month, which is like super aggressive. But the reason I did that is because it forced me to work a little bit harder, and it also forced me to be way more strategic. So by doing that, I was able to cultivate the results I needed because I was able to hit quota by like week 2. And so by hitting quota by like week 2, week 3 was more so preparations for the next month. Then week 4 is the outreach for the next month. And it all kind of snowballs and it kind of like future progression. And so those are things that I do to I track as an SDR. As a leader, it really is like, hey, are my people doing better? Are they more self-sufficient? Are they actually doing things by themselves? And I don't have to tell them what to do. I feel like that's the real leader is you give them your energy and your fire and your kind of like your intuition to do the things that you kind of would do if you were in the same spot as him. And so that's kind of how I measure that.
Yeah. So one of the things that just jumps out at me there is this whole idea of it's the things that you do today that are going to impact or influence results tomorrow. So by being able to go through and hit that quota in the first 2 weeks of the month, you've got the flexibility and the time available to you to build for the next month or build for the next quarter or build for the next year. And too often in a role, like a sales role, people are always managing to their existing quota or managing to their existing number, and they're managing backwards. So they're never at the point where they're ahead of the game. They're always trying to play catch up. And if you don't change that mindset, shift that mindset to taking a future focused approach, you will always be running away from that ball or that boulder that's chasing you down.
Yeah.
So, all right, this is kind of an off the wall question, but Julio Jones or AJ Green in fantasy football? Like if I'm drafting, I've got Julio and I've got AJ out there. Where do I go?
Julio Jones.
You got Julio Jones?
Super simple for me. Julio Jones.
You don't think Matt Ryan's going to fall off the cliff this year?
It doesn't matter. Julio Jones is the best receiver in the NFL. Like I'm just convinced, like doesn't say anything and just like he literally catches like it's incredible. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Falcons fan and don't even want to talk about the Falcons because it makes me depressed. But overall, like Julio Jones for sure.
It could be worse. You could be a Jets fan. I'm a Jets fan.
Dude, they're going to go in 16 this year. I'm just going to be real with you. I don't think they're going to make it happen.
Yeah. So this is probably going to go out sometime in November, just based on how we do our recording schedule. So
yeah.
And what I'm expecting is a top 10 defense. And 16 record. If we can do top 10 defense and 0-16 record, I'll be happy because then I can you're kind of coming together. But it's rough being a Jets fan.
It is right now. It is.
So talking about the Jets, and so here I am. I'm a kid. I'm going to games at Shea, and then they make the move and they go over to Giant Stadium. You get the excitement of the beginning of the year, and then you get the crushing things that they do just as a team throughout. One of the things you focused on is this idea of a steady mindset. If let's say you're talking to me as a Jets fan, how do I keep a steady mindset, either as a Jets fan or in sales?
Jeez. So this is my thing. This is what I tell everyone, and this is why I'm normally super calm. I don't really get mad about a lot of stuff. So really at the end of the day, like this is how I see it. Like, so you literally cannot control this. Great things will happen and bad things will happen. There's nothing you can do to control that unless you hide under a rock, which I'm not suggesting to do. So don't do that. So it's going to happen. So my thing is that like when things are going really well, like great, like enjoy that moment, but also realize like things are going to get bad, right? And it's just going to happen. But when things get bad, things will eventually turn good. So if you go through like a really, really bad time, things are going to get really, really good at some point. It can't always be really, really bad. At the same time, it can't always be really, really good. So by keeping a steady mindset and you realizing that, then you're like, okay, like what I'm going through right now this is just a part of life. So I just got to brace through whatever resources I need to do to get through it. So I need to have like cry on some friend's shoulder that the Jets aren't winning, like whatever you got to do to get through the season. Right. And then like the next season, like will probably be a better season. If you go 0-16, then like you can't do worse than 0-16. You're probably going to at least win a game next year. So that's kind of how I see it from Ryan. Yeah. So, and even in sales, in according to sales, like I think there was someone last week, 2 weeks ago, they scheduled they didn't schedule anything at all. And they were like, oh my gosh. And I was like, don't worry about it. Next week, you're going to do the best. And they did the best. It's just because like, that's just what happens. Like some weeks are just not good weeks. Some months aren't good months. Some quarters aren't good. Right. But you have to be like, okay, that sucked. But you also have to realize that like when you're at the low point that there's lessons to learn so that your bounce back is higher, has a higher velocity of good things happen to you.
Yeah. I think that's critical, is take advantage of those low points, take advantage of those lessons learned and apply them to the things that you're going to do going forward. Cause I had like, what's the old saying, this too shall pass. The other one that's out there is, if you don't like the weather in Hawaii, just wait 10 minutes. Right. So, I mean, the stuff's going to change.
Exactly.
Don't get too high, don't get too low, and have that mindset of I'm doing the right things. Trust your process.
Right.
So you made this transition from individual contributor to leading a team. What was the thing that surprised you most? Like, what did you not expect when you moved into that leadership position? And then all of a sudden, 3-6 months into it, you're like, what happened? Where did this thing go?
Yeah, I didn't realize I was going to have to be a therapist.
Yeah.
That's one thing I did not realize. I became like a real life therapist. Like I was like, all right, great. Like I'm having therapy sessions like every other week, but that's really what it is sometimes. Like I think people have to realize that, you're not only managing somebody's work life, you're also managing their personal life, because, if someone's personal life is not going well, then their work life's not going to go well. If their work life isn't going well, their personal life isn't going to go well. So it's like those things are like hand in hand. As much as people don't think that they are. Like if you're not having family, well, I'm obviously managing younger people, so that's not too much of an issue. But if someone has a family, right, then like if that's not going well, that's going to play into like their role. Like if their boyfriend and girlfriend are in a fight, like it's going to play in their role. Like if something happened, like maybe an accident, family emergency, that's going to play into the role. So it's like you become a lot closer to your reps than you think that you actually will. You think it's all about the numbers, but it's a part of it, but it's also part of like their life. Like when you see like, okay, what's wrong? It's something outside of work.
You got to be human, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what people miss. It's like they don't realize that like everyone's so focused on like numbers and like, oh, why aren't you doing this? But they're not thinking about like, wait, I'm a human too. So like there's things I'm going through. So it's like, that means that someone else is going through stuff. Like you can't be a robot. I just feel like a lot of people do that, but like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm trying to become less and less of a robot. I smile more now. Well, so I know you like to read. Is there anything you're reading right now that you're really excited about, or a couple of things you're reading right now that you're really excited about?
Yeah. So reading is the foundation and just the impact of where I'm even today. I feel like if I didn't read books, I wouldn't even be where I'm at. So it's been like literally like the foundation of everything single thing that I am right now. But what I'm reading right now, or what I just read, was a book called Captivate. Was a fantastic book. It's about human behavior and relationships. It's by Vanessa Van Edwards. It's like incredible book, like stuff that like I would have never caught like when I talk to people. Now I'm like literally like analyzing every single thing when I talk to somebody. But that's a good book that I read. I'm also reading The Lost Commandments of Sales by Anthony Ilanaro, sales trainer, sales leader. He sent me that book. And so I'm about to finish that book up this week. And then another book that someone gave me that I'm excited about is Sales Acceleration Formula by Mark Robert. So someone gave that to me. So I'm going to read that, probably finish it by this weekend. But I've actually found out that I personally actually don't like reading sales books. And I'm in sales, so it's funny to say, but I actually don't like reading them. I actually like reading psychology books because at the end of the day, like really whatever you're doing, you're dealing with people at the end of the day. So it's like the more you can understand about psychology, the human brain, how people react, what actually gets people excited, what gets them like not excited, how to act in certain situations. Like that's literally all I read. And that's been more beneficial to me than really anything else that I've ever read. So that's kind of like my gist.
Captivate. Are there other psychology books that you've read that resonate or things that come top of mind? And we'll put links in the show notes to all of these.
Of course. There's one and some of these are really deep. So some of you guys might read this that are listening and you're gonna be like, holy crap, this is really deep stuff. Why is Morgan telling us this? But hey, to your own discretion. So Lucifer Effect is a really good book. It was recommended to me. Really super deep in psychology, like how people change their behaviors based on the atmosphere that they're in, based on the people they hang around, the auras that they're in, like the people that they hang out with, the mentors that they have, like really deep stuff, like the psychologist, like subconscious stuff that you don't really realize. So that was really good. Another one that I read was just about social intelligence. So like the psychology of like how your intelligence like perceives to other people. Those are like two books that I kind of like top of mind that I have. Like there's a tons of others that I've read, but psychology is something that I'm getting really deep into. And I'm studying like all this stuff because I think it's just super important to know.
If you haven't read it, Influenced by Cialdini is a really good book. And it might be Cialdini, but he's a professor at ASU. And he's got another book that's recently been published called Persuasion. Not Persuasion, but Persuasion, excuse me. That's out there. And then on the leadership side, one that I'd recommend if you haven't read it yet is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Awesome book on leadership and decentralized command and process. Well, Morgan, this has been great. Why don't you take some time here and let people know where they can find you, how to follow you?
For sure.
Other interesting things you just want to share with the audience.
Yeah. So I guess where to find me. So where to find me is at Morgan J. Ingram on Twitter, Morgan J. Ingram on LinkedIn. Very simple to find. Instagram, that's all Morgan J. Ingram. So if you type that name, you'll find it on all social networks. What I want to share, I guess, lasting thoughts, parting thoughts. Biggest thing I think is that like when you feel fire in something that you're doing and you're not getting as much visibility as you would like, I would say continue to do it and be consistent. You know, I've been able to do a lot, I guess, since I've started here at Terminus. It's been about 2 years now. And, you know, from like where I started, and it's interesting because I didn't know anything about CRM, market automation, even sales. It wasn't even a sales role. And now, you know, I've cultivated until like SDR Chronicles, YouTube, all But it's only because like I really believed in like what I was saying, and I had a fire about like what I was talking about. And I feel like if you don't have that and you're just following trends, like it's not going to be as effective for you instead of like actually believing in like what you're doing, because that's going to come off to your viewership.
Yeah, I think that whole idea of, at least in podcasts that I've heard you on and episodes of the SDR Chronicles, what I can tell about you is you're naturally inquisitive. You care. You're interested in learning more about what people are doing and why people are doing, and you ask questions. And I think that if we all could do more of that, we'd all be in a better place 2 to 3 years from now than we are today. We'd move forward. We'd continue to excel. Jody, anything from your side?
Well, I'm just curious. You two were making comments about when you go to the gym, you have to actually work. You weren't taking jabs at me there, were you?
Always. We know that you're into this whole 10,000 steps a day. And okay, 10,000 steps a day. When are you actually going to start throwing around some iron?
Unfortunately, Mike, we're out of time. So we're going to have to wrap up. Morgan, it's been such a treat to have you as a guest on the show. And I know what SDR means now, so I'm not as confused as I was before. And you're
now knowledgeable.
I am. I'm now knowledgeable. Well, I encourage you to go check out Morgan. He let us know where we can find him. He's doing some great stuff. Thank you, Mike Simmons, for the great episode. If you want to find out what we're up to at Catalyst Sale, you can visit us at catalystsale.com. There you can also find all of the back episodes of the show. Thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast.